Okay, well, thank you very much. I've kind of prepared a presentation, which you're now not going to see, because I actually believe seeing what we're doing really tries to explain exactly what we're doing and how we're going about doing it. That said, I'll add hot, yeah, and talk about pretty much what we're doing in Ross on Wye, and as a regenerative advisor across the whole of the UK, Europe, and now North America, what that actually means and how that affects not only the river but the whole environment and everything we're trying to do. So I'll take you on a little bit of a journey about some of the things that happened to us. And one of the most important things for us, I worked out after a world tour where I did a Nuffield scholarship back in 2014, 2015, that the word moron is something that probably appointed to most of farming in the UK. When I say moron, we're just putting more and more and more and more on, and we're not actually getting much better yields. My father was getting the same yields in 1984 that we're getting now. The cost and the amount of inputs we're putting on is absolutely astronomically high compared to what we were doing then. Things have massively changed, and they've massively changed for a few reasons. But the most important reason really is the fact that we've actually forgotten that soil is a living organism. Soil is something that actually, as a farmer, for far too long and for far too many people, look at it as a medium in which to grow a crop. What we have to do as farmers is start to realise that soil is the very thing and the very substance in which can provide us for food, an income, but more importantly the environment too. And what I've actually found out over the last sort of 8-9 years, getting into the 10th year of actually farming for my soil, my profitability has increased, the environment in which we farm has massively uplifted. I seem to be a happier person for going out on my farm, because one thing I think for farming point of view, and I talk to an awful lot of farmers around the world now, they're all really got mental health problems. And if you ever see the suicide rate of farming, unfortunately, it's every other day a farmer takes his own life. It's a terrible place to be for a lot of people, because they're unfortunately caught on this treadmill of more on, more on, more on. And when I say about more on, I'm talking about agrochemicals, I'm talking about inputs, I'm talking about the cost of machinery, I'm talking about diesel, I'm talking about artificial fertilizers, I'm also, of course, talking about chicken manure, turkey manure, and all those massive problems that are associated. So what does it mean when you start to say, well, how do I get off being a moron? How do I jump off this treadmill of running faster and faster and faster, or as such, chasing the Red Queen and never actually catching up? Well, what we first started to realise was that our soils are fairly well saturated in all the nutrients I'm ever going to need to grow a crop. The problem we realised was, in actual fact, it is biology within the soil that actually allows these nutrients to become available to my growing crop. You can imagine what artificial fertilisers, huge amounts of tillage, all the pesticides we were using, irrigation water, all these things were actually, unfortunately, having a massively detrimental effect on our soils, and it is across the whole of the catchment, as well as the whole of the country, as well as across the whole of the world. So what we started to do is start thinking about what it was about our soils and why we were doing what we were doing. One of the most interesting things, and I'm sure you've come across people talking about soils as farmers, is the fact that we use this thing called an index system for measuring phosphates, potassium, magnesium in the soil. These were developed in 1954. And the first thing when I go and speak to a farmer is, if we're going to farm as if we were farming in 54, it's time to go and get the horses back out and do all these sort of things and actually start realising that if that's where you're going to farm, then it was invented by somebody that, funny enough, was selling fertiliser at the time. We've got a real problem. And the problem, of course, is the government have also accepted that this is a reason in which we can justify fertiliser use. But of course, development in soil science has massively developed in 70 years. And what we now know is that actually the soil index system is an absolutely terrible way of measuring the amount of fertilizer required for a crop. And if we were to do and change and actually start to realize that if we made this bioavailable from soil biology, the amount of fertilizers we need to apply to our crops massively reduces. And once we start making the soil work, funny enough, the need for pesticides reduces massively too. So funny enough, what we end up with is the beautiful thing of a healthy soil producing a healthy plant, and a healthy plant has the ability to fight off fungus and insects and things like that. And all of a sudden, of course, you're not exposing the environment anything like to what we were doing in the past. So what do I do differently than everybody else is doing at the moment? Well, I'd like to say that actually there's more people starting to listen to what I'm doing, which is, I think, actually quite a success story. But we use what we call the 5 principles of soil health. And the first thing of soil health is we look at minimal disturbance. We only do a cultivation about 1 year in 8. So every other time we have cover crops, we have living roots, and we have lots of greenery going on our ground. Of course, this massively helps infiltration rates. One of the big things, of course, of farming the way I do is slowing the flow. I know we're not talking about that so much today, but when we talk about saving the Y, one of the big things for us downriver is actually getting you guys up here to start holding some of the water in your organic matter. 1 kilogram of organic matter, interestingly enough, holds 17 kilos of water. That's huge. And what we need to do is all of us focus on organic matter. And the reason we need to focus on this, of course, if we can slow the flow in the winter, and that 17 kilos of water is being held in the organic matter fraction, funny enough, when we have weather like this, it starts to give it back to the crop. So if I'm ever going to increase profitability, the most important thing for me is building organic matter. It makes perfect sense, and funny enough, it makes perfect profitability, because if I'm not draining the fields all winter and then covering them in water all spring, it's slightly ironic, really, isn't it, when we consider that that's what we're doing, especially in the maritime climate that we live in. So that's one of the things, limited disturbance. The next thing is cover, armor, as we call it. You'll always see nature spends her whole life trying to armor herself. We call them weeds a lot of the times. You only have to look at a pavement, a crack in a pavement, always comes up with a bit of meadowgrass or a little bit of dandelion or something, opportunities to cover and armor. So one thing we do here is, or at home, is actually make sure we're growing something in the ground at all times, armoring the soil. It provides massive amount of shade, and a photograph I would have showed on a click here right now would have shown you that our soil temperature yesterday, where it was exposed, was 42 degrees centigrade. That kills everything in the soil. Under our living mulch, 22. Absolutely fine. You can imagine the evaporation differences, huge. We protect the soil, we protect water, we protect the soil life. It's massively important. So armor is the second really important thing we focus on. The third thing we look at is the living root. And this is slightly strange to many farmers I speak to, but which is an oddity really. But anyway, roots, believe it or not, exude more things than they take in. The purpose of a root is to release sugar into the soil. Everybody know that? Good. You're all nodding, shaking. Okay. So roots are not something that just sucks the soil dry. They're not humans, you know? So funny enough, they do two things. They pump out loads of sugars. And why do they do that? Well, funny enough, all the microbes living in the soil live on these sugars. So what do the microbes give back to the plant? Funny enough, they exchange all of the nutrients that are in the soil. So you can see there's a beautiful symbiotic relationship between a root and a plant root. And therefore, when a plant does all its photosynthesis all day long, as it does, it's very efficient. Funny enough, during the night time, a lot of the sugar exudes out of the root, feeds the biology. The biology then gives the plant back a load of nutrition, and everybody's rather growing quite well. Of course, when we start putting huge amounts of artificial fertilizers on the soil, that symbiotic relationship finishes and dies and doesn't work. So that's one major problem. Is that enough? So that's what living roots and why living roots are so important, and that's why we graze cover crops very differently than most. And the beauty of cover crops is, number one, you can feed some animals with them. Number two is to protect your soil with the armor. Number three, of course, is to continuous living root. So when we graze our cover crops at home, we leave at least 30 to 50% of green material and living root in the soil when we move the animals off. So what you see when you come and visit our farm, and we have many open days of which you're all more than welcome to come and have a look, is that actually these cover crops are not there for 100% of animals, they're there for 100% of my soil. And funny enough, the animals can get a benefit, but it's not for the benefit of the animals, if you see what I mean. The fourth thing I talk about is diversity. Monocultures are horrific. If you ever look at a verge side at any time of the year, they're generally far greener than the field behind it. They're full of diversity. And funny enough, if you ever just take a spade and you just dig that verge side and jump over the hedge into the farmer's field and have a dig there, if you're lucky enough to get the spade in the ground, you'll realize that the soil type should be exactly the same, but one thing's absolutely destroyed and the other one's absolutely beautiful living thing. Diversity is really important. When we talk about diversity at home, we've got a little bit obsessed, to be honest, in so much that, of course, a lot of people do cropping rotations. We're all familiar with that. We need diversity of livestock and plants. We need intercropping. So we grow things like boats, as we call them, which is a bean and oat mix. We grow our companion crops with our oilseed rape, which means that actually we fix lots of nitrogen for our oilseed rape. We're also potato farmers. And normally, as soon as I talk to people about maize and potatoes, they instantly think we're destroying the environment. I'd love you to come and have a look at my tates. They're slightly different. We graze our cover crops sympathetically. We plant our potatoes with one powered pass, as we call it. One machine plants our potatoes. We plant them with Johnson Sioux extract, which is a biological inoculant. We also plant them with companions. We also plant every 24 meters of wild flower strip to attract beneficials. We use no phosphate. I think that's quite important for today, isn't it? Funny enough, when you get biology starting to work in your soil, there's more phosphate available than you'll ever need from my crops. So that's something that we're trying to explain, how you get biology working in your soil to provide all this nutrition. So diversity is massively important. Of course, we've also got to the stage where we realize diversity within our business is really quite important. And for those that ever get to see us, we're doing all things from kefir water to a brewery to a shop to a vineyard and all those sort of things that makes diversity really quite important. The last thing is the integration of livestock. There is no quicker way of building soil organic matter than to correctly graze livestock. There's one important word there, and that's correctly. Livestock, unfortunately, in the UK, on 99% of everything I ever look at, produce some of the most unhealthy soils in the UK because they're grazed like a lawn. There's no ability for that grass to photosynthesize correctly, so it can't feed any microbes, so the microbes are long dead. That's really problematic. The use of massive amounts of wormers, massive amounts of fly spray, all becoming huge problems for animals. Of course, we do a thing called mob grazing. We only graze one paddock for one day before moving them off. We work on the principle that our animals actually eat a third. They trample a third into the ground and therefore build organic matter. And they leave a third. And funny enough, the plants don't actually ever stop growing because the rooting of these plants goes down 2 to 3 meters and can keep pulling water and nutrients up all the time. The harder you graze something, if this grass in front of us, we took a spade, I can guarantee, generally, as a point of reference, whatever you've got above ground, you've generally got below ground. So you can imagine if I'm grazing my pasture land with lots of diversity in it, so we plant chicory, we plant plantain. It's about this high when we move them in. We're foraging a lot further. So if you came in and grazed this today and did what everyone else is doing, it's brown tomorrow. There's no chance of that recovering this summer. And unfortunately what happens then is people start putting fertilizer on as a desperation measure to actually get grass to grow. So that's a real problem. So livestock correctly is becoming massively important. briefly touched on potatoes. One other thing we grow, and I think there's grown quite a lot up here, is maize. I've got a great photograph of maize just here, look. Yeah. What we did, we direct drilled maize into a herbal ley and took a photograph. And then on the other half of the field, we ploughed and powered and did what everybody does normally. Funny enough, the weather's been quite adverse for us this year, yeah. That emerged 3.5 weeks later, and it's struggling like anything on the ploughed and powered. That we planted and conserved moisture is doing a fantastic job at the moment. Last year it had higher gross margin for obvious reasons. We don't spend on all those inputs. We actually manage our soil in such a way that it actually gives to us. And what we're finding as farmers is the more we're working with our soils, the more it's rewarding us, the more, funny enough, the more profitability we get. And I think probably the most important thing for us is watching the wildlife return to Townsend. I can't begin to explain unless you come and have a tour, and you're more than welcome to come and have a see. But I get woken up in the morning by dawn chorus these days, and it's something that's starting to disappear massively. You know, we work closely with all of the British Ornithological Societies, and we have bird counts, we have mammal counts, but we also do insect counts as well. And insects is one of the most important things for what we're trying to achieve at home. We're trying to achieve, of course, a balance of insects, predators, prey. But one of our most delightful parts of the river that we farm on, and we farm about 3 miles of the river, is we have one of the largest sand martin colonies on the Wye. There's a reason why they fly over our farm constantly, day and night, picking up insects. It's amazing to watch. And funny enough, I was a bit stressed the other day. My wife went off for the day. I was left in charge because my wife does most of the farming. And we had ewes lambing late by mistake. We had cows doing what cows do and get out. Everything was going a bit wrong. And I was just starting to wonder why on earth I did this on a Sunday afternoon. And I came up the track and 4 male yellowhammers flew out in front of me. And I just stopped and thought, that's why you do it. It's absolutely amazing. And what us as farmers have got to start doing is appreciate the environment in which we live in. We've got to start celebrating the river as one of the most beautiful parts of, I was brought up 45 years on the river and loving the river. I'm quite embarrassed about the state of the river, and that's why I do what I can, talking to farmers, especially those with a slightly open door, get in there. You know, what I'd like you guys to do is help me along and say, have you ever heard of regenerative farming? You know, there are people doing some really good stuff, and in actual fact, it doesn't have to be this massive leap of faith. I think that's the main worry for most farmers is, well, I can't afford to farm like that. Well, you can't afford not to. So on that moment, I've no idea how long I've been, because I've got thumbs up, that'll do. Thanks.